It's actually kind of a shame that more anti-Marxists don't know more about Marxism, because frankly, most people who are anti-Marxist don't realize just how stupid the ideology.
Alright, well we know Ben doesn't know anything about Marxism, so let's see what kind of straw man he invents to try and knock down.
Friend Engels, he sort of combined the dialectical methods of Hegel along with materialism. You may be familiar with Hegel's Dialectics, the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
No, I'm not familiar with that, because I've actually read Hegel. And nowhere in any of his work does he say thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Good job finding the Wikipedia definition of dialectics to argue against. It's really a shame more anti-Marxists don't know more about Marxism. Then they could actually argue against Marxism instead of Wikipedia.
Well, Marx and Engels believe that this is something that occurred all throughout nature, and there was the negation of the negation of the negation. And they believed in the human, social, and economic world that all of these negations and contradictions and material conditions would eventually lead to people being in communism.
Bro, this is such a distortion. You're just saying a bunch of Marxist words without explaining the meaning that Marx and Engels give to those words. It's like you got your definition of communism from this kid. What Hegel's dialectic actually is an attempt at giving a scientific analysis of the development of human thought over time. And so how do you use the scientific method to analyze the development of human thought over time? You have to go to the place where human thought is produced, the universities or the academies. So Hegel sees that we have this totality of human knowledge which can be split into different fields. So science, by example, we have a totality of knowledge which constitutes our understanding of science in general as a species. As individuals and groups of people make breakthroughs in science, it leads to a change or an increase in our totality of human knowledge. Through a new experiment or study, what we previously knew about science is negated, leading to the addition of new and fresh knowledge, which changes the totality of knowledge itself, which is what we call a sublation. So this isn't just trying to fit the entire world into this little word game of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, as Ben claims, but rather these words like negation and sublation are used by Hegel to describe things that he observes in material reality. So you can see Hegel is not as idealist as people say. He was sort of a proto-materialist. But Marx and Engels wanted to look at the production of human life and how that changes over time rather than the production of knowledge that Hegel's looking at. So rather than going into the universities where knowledge is produced, Marx and Engels go to the factories where commodities are produced. And through a careful analysis of capitalism and other economic systems, development and change over time, as well as their contradictions, Marx and Engels diagnose many problems with capitalism, such as automation, accumulation, concentration. But because capitalism always changes, the analysis needs to be updated with time, which is why Marx is not a prophet, like Ben claims in this video, because this is a silly video. So this is part 2 of explaining Hegel for libertarians and for everyone else. So sometimes Hegel's philosophy can kind of sound like gobbledygook to those who don't know the vocabulary. And Hegel himself was aware of this because he's basically inventing words to describe new phenomena that he's observing as he's making this analysis of the development of human thought over time. But I think using a real material example will help us better understand what the principles of dialectics are and why they're important, why they can help us interpret reality and why they're not gobbledygook. So Marx was one of the very first thinkers to understand automation under capitalism. When there are advancements in productivity, when we have robots that can help us manufacture things faster, people lose their jobs. So you have this sort of contradictory motion as time passes, where we are advancing technologically and becoming more efficient in how we can produce as a species, but the more innovations that are made, the more workers are thrown out of the workforce. And Marx is one of the first to analyze this because he's looking at things dialectically, meaning he's not looking at automation in isolation, but rather he's looking at it as a product of the contradictions that are inherent to capitalism. Because one of the primary principles of dialectics is the unity of opposites and the interpenetration between those opposites. So is that just gobbledygook? Well, no. Under capitalism, you have a unity of opposites, the workers and the capitalists. And the interpenetration between those opposites is what we call class struggle. And because it's a unity of opposites, even though the capitalists and the workers make up the same firm or the same company or manufacturing factory, their interests are not the same. It's in the interest of the capitalist to increase productivity so he can create and sell more commodities, and to pay as little for the production of those commodities as he possibly can. The more a capitalist pays in wages, the less he gets to take home himself. So when these advancements in productivity come along, it allows the capitalist to lay off or fire a bunch of their workers and produce just as much as before, but with less money paid in wages. So even though capitalists and workers make up a unity, what's good for one is terrible for the other. And because the worker-capitalist relation is at the core of capitalist society, it means that technological innovation and advancements in production, which should be good for all society, should alleviate the amount of time that we have to work overall, actually ends up being a bad thing for the majority of society, but a good thing for only the few who own capital. Self-driving trucks are great for the capitalists, not so great for the truckers. So without understanding that contradiction between workers and capitalists, which is at the core of our system, it would be almost impossible to understand why automation is happening. And this is why Hegel's dialectic is important. It's not laws that Hegel or Marx or Engels made up in their heads. It's laws of development and change, which they observe by analyzing the real world as it exists over a period of time, that is.